and Diva Savina, Divi Wangi, and then also Kiawale, ne, also Dendelaya, and Jiang, Divasa, the nation, and Masumi, and Mayane, and Mason Gije, and it one you go on, Toyaki, Tomato, Masi, one you go on, said the Jasmine good, Koyaki, Galaka, which is, the Inza, and you get Dushin, one you Chica, Dibonki to be able to Penny Milly, and Rolla Gavaina, the Nitania military Shindune Galacabores, the big the Bill Mason, and the rebate at Jaso, rebate Miloa, me making rebate and Jasolia, and Yashin Bechaje, or Dusin kissing out the Galacabores and Dusin Shirada.
Good evening. So last week, we looked at how, having attained this precious human rebirth marked with 18 freedoms and endowments, it's imperative that we utilize this remarkable opportunity we've each attained to accumulate extensive virtue. And if we do not, and we end up falling into the lower realms, we'll be trapped in this the intense suffering of the lower realms for an immense period of time. It will be as if we cannot even hear the words higher realms. Therefore, we must strive now, whilst we have this precious human rebirth, to purify past non-virtue and refrain from any further non-virtue. Moreover, we also looked at an illustration utilizing that of a turtle to show just how very rare this precious human rebirth is.
We will
continue where we look at the great need to purify through relying on the four opponent powers. Then the 21st verse from the 4th chapter. If through the negativity of just a single instant, eons must be spent in the deepest hell of Avicii, then due to negativity accumulated in beginningless samsara, it goes without saying one will not migrate to higher realms. Looking at the first two lines, if through the negativity of just a single instant, eons must be spent in the deepest hell of Avicii. So this refers to if someone, whether an ordinary being or a bodhisattva, gets angry at a bodhisattva, then immense negativity is accumulated. And as we know from our own lived experience, anger tends to abide for quite some period. But even if it were just for an instant, a single instant, that negativity would lead to rebirth in the hells.
Geshe Jikji Digbe Yang La Du da Jisa Geshe Digba Chanyu Semba La Mi Chi Kongra Ge Wende da Karma Kashe da Chuja Nima Kashe Dine Kongra Sawa Inde da Digba Chenpo Yin Ba Reso Yang Se Ma Se Ane Chik Pene Digba Karma Chik Kashe Chik Linre Lia Dine Kongra Ge Wa Ina Digba Chenpo Sagi Do Was Jisa Digba Sawa Geshe Yang Se da Dile Chewa Ge da Gyunywa da Gyunywa Ge Wa da Digba Che Yin Ba Reso da Yang Se Dige.
In the first line, if through the negativity of just a single instant. So the inclusion of the term just is to show that something as minor as just a single instant leads to such a negative outcome. So therefore, there's no question that if one is angry for longer than just a single instant, the negativity accumulated will be immense.
지나다 디네기 디바 사바이나 디바디 규디바 사바자 데고 가와지리 람나 지나 마 나솔 마지루 나마 네 디바 첨보사자 야와 나르멘 마 마지루 그래서 제산 가와 나르메 네규르나 제자다 근데 게디 가제바도 네기레선 빠도메 봐서 가와서 장고 빠도메 봐 아니 마가솔 인가 내면에 깨지는 동안요 네고레서 가와 나르메 네규르나스.
This non-virtuous cause, this mind of anger, when that cause ripens as a propelling imprint, will lead to rebirth in the deepest hell, the hell of relentless torment, Vici. And there one will have to abide for eons, not for a brief rebirth, but for an extensive, protracted period of time, suffering immensely.
안다 된다 디치 니버디기 다 가제 된다라 제유심바 찍래 양아주 코로기지 크르 망부게 와네 다다 디버침부 인데이 코로기지 잠지 깨바 이나야 디이왕게 디바 빠도메 디버침부 쇼사고레스 딘 디버사바디기 제고딜라 가와기 와선 깨와치마 나솔마기 냐와마 딘마기지는 윤대안에 렌직 마에 바 장망부 도시에 깨와지 레제
So brief, these two lines point that if one is angry towards a bodhisattva, this is clearly greatly non-virtuous. And to make this abundantly clear, it's stated if one were angry for just an instant, just a mere moment, then that the strength of that non-virtue would lead to eons of suffering in the worst of hells. So how much more so then if one is angry for a protracted period?
rānglia kētīn chēmbō pāmati kīla kōna sāwāi dīpa chē, dī mēn bīgēdā mīshān āzulia chāndā zālia jīk chāwā chirā mē tīkēn tīla kōna sāna dīpa chūngā chē wā. Tī kāñchī lē rānglia jīn chēmbō tāng kētīn chēmbō kācē yīmbā chīlia kōna sāna dīpa chē chē wā. Chēsā jāyū sēmbā lā kōna sāna dīpa chē kē wā kārā sāna jāyū sēmbā sētā simchān tham chē kī dōndā lā yā, simchān tham chē dōngā sē yā dā, simchān tham chē kī dīgī chūyā kī dōndā lā, anē chī samlo tangje ane janliya penpe chawa janyang dhugu yoba insa dene ki jige simjan tamje la pando dhugun jili yanga dhu kono sawa dene dipa chimo sago re jiri yu di pe masi ki ye chimo pando chimo za chimo simjan tamje la pando chigan jili insa ane dele ya kono sana dipa che sagiri ese chimo sagiri se kimjan lu diriwa.
Distinction is being made here about anger towards a bodhisattva. And anger towards a bodhisattva is incredibly non-virtuous. And this is because of the incredible motivation, the incredible kind heart of a bodhisattva. This is a being who wants to benefit all beings without exception. And whilst the bodhisattva will gladly help beings in minor ways. They have their heart set on helping beings in the most important, most beneficial of ways, leading them to enlightenment. So this is the most remarkable of beings. Therefore, being angry at such a being accumulates incredibly powerful non-virtue. When one is angry at a non-bodhisattva, of course this is non-virtuous, but not nearly as much negativity is created because of the quality of the mind of the being towards whom one is angry. But amongst ordinary beings, there are those for whom being angry towards them still creates immense non-virtue, not as much as a bodhisattva, but more than most others. And this comes down to how much kindness they've shown to you and how much benefit they bring into your life. So here one would think most clearly of one's parents. So if one is angry at one's parents, immense negativity is also created, not nearly as much as when towards a bodhisattva, because of the quality of the motivation of the bodhisattva who holds in their heart all beings. But a bodhisattva holds you, a parent holds you, their dear child, in their heart. Therefore, anger towards them is much greater than just to another ordinary being.
이제서 펜버로 최고로 표현이야. 전유sem발라 샨다 전유sem발 멤버지를 초표에다 전유sem발을 초표에다 대수놈스 체사고. 그래서 전유sem발세디 sem제 탐지일이야. 연다 두개 개침부시 오지는 인자 될려 초표나 네 개와 채와다. 네 멤버에다 전유sem발 멤버지리야. 주도신 초표나 됐어. 개와 총알. 이제 개와 체사다. 개와 채와서 디바 체사 사고라티 개와 체나 개와 체. 초표나 될려 펜버두나 네 처가 디부 개와 체제. 뇌버기는 디부 채와라지. 그래서 되게 그래서 그 신헬이야 판도도 그 판도 채와 이제 뒤로 와. 얘는 저기 뒤로 와대. 강부직 날에 미지게 강보에 로드 매버 샤바네 그 예바시 당기로 와. 로 매바서 그 이나 집이 그 로간 매버 샤바네 그 예바시 당기로 와. 그래서 집이 로간 매바서 망고지를 경험하고 와. 강부직이 나 미지게 강부직 로 매바서 미지를 내고 마도 탐질 내고 말와. 니기 그 예바 중화로 와. 이 나신이다. 그 전시센발은 녀샤바 녀샤바는 또 샘진 망고질이야. 진 잘내는 거 봐서 편도 두고서 니기 낀지 전에다고 디버체 사기에서 편바두나 델리아 초표나 아니 개화체 디부 되네가 콘르스키 시스템 때문에 디버체와 되네기 전시센바 섬다 좀 제소이랑 야고를 했으면 제소이랑 섬 끼지 담지게 되네 편이 받는 거 봐서 책으로 봐도 또 책으로 봐.
Bodhisattvas, being such remarkable beings, in dependence on them or in our interactions with them, we can create strong negativity, but also great virtue. This is because of the power of their mind. They become an incredibly powerful object in terms of our interactions with them, produce powerful karmic seeds, either virtuous or non-virtuous. So if making offerings to a bodhisattva, for example, making offerings to a bodhisattva accrues so much more merit than to an ordinary being. So on both sides of the ledger, one can create either extensive virtue or non-virtue in relation to a bodhisattva because of the quality of their mind. For example, if one, for some strange reason, decided to cut the electrical wires going to a particular house, then that would be a non-virtuous thing to do because one would be acting in a way so that that home was without electricity. But if one were rather to destroy a power station, that would have so much worse impact, and therefore would be a more non-virtuous deed to do. Likewise, with how we relate to a bodhisattva. Either we can, by getting angry at a bodhisattva, accrue extensive non-virtue, or by making offerings towards or rejoicing in the qualities of a bodhisattva, so much merit can be accumulated. So there's a parallel between a moment of anger towards a bodhisattva and a moment of rejoicing in the qualities of a bodhisattva have an outsized result.
ko thoma me ban di ma shu sa yo da nga so ye da nya wa di pa do me ba sa yo was je san thome ko ba sa di is je san di pa do me ba di sa de yo des da de ni di ba de ma sha ba na ngo zu shi ba de ma sha ba je nyen bo tian je pa ma sha ba shi ba na ane ga wa zhu gu re sin ne dian zhu ki ma des dian zhu mi zhuo mo chi ko dian zhu mi zhuo dian zhu ma ji wa ji ngan zhu ma zhu gu re is di ngan zhu zhuo ya la ade xie hua ya ma sin ji da zhu mo ji gu se de yin ji mi ji zhu re is wo da de ne gi di ba de ma sha ba je shi ba na da de ne gi ngan zhu ge dian zhu mi ji wa je ngan zhu ma ji de ta che ba re is wo da.
The verse continues. Then, due to negativity accumulated in beginningless samsara, it goes without saying, one will not migrate to higher realms. So this makes reference to lives previous to this, where so much non-virtuous imprints, non-virtuous imprints accumulated in lives previous to this, those imprints still abide on our continuum. So if we don't utilize this opportunity we have to purify our mind through relying on antidotes, should any of those non-virtuous imprints ripen at the time of death, they can only lead to rebirth in the lower realms.
ko thoma me ban di ba do me ba sa sha yo di za ndi gi ana nga sol ma ke che ne ne do nga ba do me ba nyong ye du si ng ko wa sa gi wa sa ng ko wa sa se di da la nga ji nga sol ke ba de ju mi ke wa sa ba na mi ke wa de la de ne je bu nga sol ki ge sa ji song ko wa da.
In this verse, we see that just a mere moment of negativity directed towards a bodhisattva accumulates immense negativity, and this can only lead to suffering results, and if it propels a rebirth, can only be a rebirth in the lower realms. Kewa chi lingor kawa lingor sen din dendrol ki ruwa dendrol ki res chesa nga so ki ma de dendrol ki res dene inza nga so tablam khar yo se ne nga so ki den del ya du su dang ko ba ya ko yu be den del ya da den ko ba chi be ju je je di ba de ni be to shu ko ne sha ko re so da ni be to shu ko ne di ba sha yo de di ni be kewa ju yo kewa di ki nga so dendrol ki yu ju ko ruwa chesa ni be to shu ko ne di ba sha ko chesa del ya sem ba me ma ta sem ba me 요모 초소 마다와치 셈 바유이데 행셈 계획 초소 단 주 바유이데 나마저 지티바티 이부터 쉬고네 샤고레서 두송거다 단단히 부디르다 직시디. Then the implicit meaning of this verse is recognizing that I do not want to suffer. I must thereby make the most of this opportunity to ensure that I prevent the possibility of falling into the lower realms. And to do so, I must both bring an end to the accumulation of new non-virtue and purify past non-virtues. And the way to do that is to rely on the skillful method of the four opponent powers. Through relying on the four opponent powers, I'll purify I'll both purify past negativities and accumulate virtue, thereby closing the door to rebirth in the lower realms and creating causes for rebirth in the higher realms. So now, whilst I have this opportunity, this remarkable rebirth, all the qualities required, I should utilize it well, not let it go to waste. And through relying on the virtuous mind of conscientiousness, I must apply the 4 opponent powers, thereby accumulate virtue, purify non-virtue, and ensure ongoing excellent rebirths.
먼저 시르데 긴기고를 안선에 깨는 규리메가 쇠사와서 제고야요 말와 가와지어서 된돌을 기고래서 제산 규를 때네 개와사바 있나 아니 디게 되고 개와된 안선 된돌을 개와린 거래서 제산 규제기 된제 세티야 고투에 차고들이야 규를 때네 규야고 쳐하면 될라 때네 제고야고 치고요 바다 규 아니 남바 디볼 사와는 될라 때네 제고 동안요하리 용고요 바디 다치기 도시는서리 규 Gulatin, Tiburi, Gulatin, you but the Dusan sometime, you did it, you did it, at some time or what in
So here we see this linking to topics we've covered well previously. From causes which are non-virtuous, these, when they ripen into a rebirth, can only lead to rebirth in the suffering lower realms. And if one eliminates such causes, one will lack the cause to be reborn in the lower realms, which means one will necessarily be reborn in the higher realms. And the way to eradicate the previous non-virtuous imprints on our continuum is to rely on the method of the 4 opponent powers. So here our attention is turned towards dependent arising, in particular dependency on causes. From virtuous causes, happiness follows. From non-virtuous causes, suffering follows. So here, our attention turns towards dependent arising, in particular, dependency on causes.
Tibe noturi da jung yabu mare tibe noturi sempegeda samda chita and the mohobana that mohobana that tibe yune chigme sempegeda domsemge chirwa da jesa da yabu mara sambade gyesem chagruwa jesa da mohobane chijinenge zaw chigme sembe samda bana da domsem chagruwa domsem da di yemboni de gyesem da domsem ni de chagruwa da tingi dopse da tingi doptelya anjiga juge gemje konjo sum Dengi top check it, and Dimi big Janjosem, not Dombani, the Jamnije, no Dombani, the double Cheratigia, Dingy top checkerwa. There's not the nigger sometimes that thing it debate at the ring and Delia, in Kemio Conjosumgi, to Helia, by Shaggy, Sempig, the nigger, Mazza, Tapche, debate, the nigger Shaggy, Sem Dini, the Bashagi, Dubakie, then the Bashagi, Dondala, then a Conjosum, Jamro, Japsu Toyata, the Nesemja Tamjia. Jambade nijo komya dene kombaina dene kombi lodida ju yembe top charu ba jesa jam nijo komya jamro jeya dene a ju je konjo da japsu tone a ji chebo puya lo so ba da cha che lo so ba da nga sa ba kar chebe di chebe di da yembe top charu jesa di du shin che di da ju yembe top shu ko ne sha se de da dur dur shi chane dene ro.
So to present the 4 opponent powers then briefly. So here the order in which one generates is not fixed, generates them is not fixed, it's as you feel appropriate. So one can start by recalling past negativities. And here it's important to call to mind both what one can actually remember, as well as calling to mind things that one would have certainly done, even if one has no recollection of doing it, because in lives previous to this, one would have engaged in such non-virtues. So one generates regret for such non-virtue, recognizing both the harm that we possibly cause to others, as well as the suffering awaiting for us because of those imprints on our mind. So we generate regret, and thereby, and to make that regret strong within us, we recall, we remind ourselves of harm we've caused to others, as well as the suffering that awaits us. Thereafter, one can generate, so that would be the power of regret, then one can generate the power of restraint, where one makes, or the power of the promise, where one commits to restraining one's mind from engaging in such activities again. So one makes a promise, I will not repeat such non-virtuous behavior. So that could be the second of the four opponent powers, the power of regret followed by the power of restraint. Then one can generate the power of reliance. The power of reliance refers to the two minds that one relies on in order for one's spiritual development. Explicitly, one's purification, but also one's accumulation. So the power of reliance is where we rely on the three jewels. So one generates the mind of refuge. And as this is a Mahayana practice, one also generates bodhicitta. So these two, refuge and bodhicitta, are what we rely on. Recognizing that what we've regretted is contrary to the advice or the teachings, so contrary to the three jewels, it's also contrary to the intent of bodhicitta. So here we generate the third opponent power, that of reliance. And then finally, the fourth is the power of the antidote. And the power of the antidote is any virtuous mind that you feel drawn to. It could be further meditation on refuge. It could be further meditation on bodhicitta. It could be engaging in something physical, such as making offerings or prostrations and so forth. So this then is the fourth opponent power, that of the antidote. For one's purification, to fulfill one's hopes, in other words, to be effective, it's imperative that you engage with the purification with conviction. Because if you ask ourselves, where are these non-virtuous imprints that we are wanting to purify? Well, they are found on our consciousness, on our continuum. Therefore, their antidotes need to be consciousnesses. This means when engaging in the practice of purification, these four opponent powers, one needs to engage with, cultivate them or generate them in a way that is heartfelt, is sincere. Because if, for example, one just generates the power of regret through a mere recitation, whilst there's some purpose to this, but because the mind is not deeply engaged, actual regret has not arisen, the purification that will follow will be weak, will be superficial. Similarly, when one comes to the process of refuge and bodhicitta, for this opponent power of reliance to serve its purpose of purifying the mind, one needs to generate bodhicitta, generate refuge. Then it has the power to deeply purify. Likewise with the power of the antidote. Again, if one merely recites something or goes through steps of a meditation, it's not that this is of no use, it's just very superficial. The change to the negativity in our continuum will be minor. Whereas if one meditates well on, for example, emptiness or on bodhicitta or on refuge, then one will purify significantly more. So in brief, because it's non-virtuous imprints that we are wanting to purify, the way this is done through the four opponent powers is to try and generate these minds in a way that is powerful, that is heartfelt. Then purification happens.
그래서 이내기 당한주 넘기네 다 개화를 사회 되는 무주시 님의 다와로 지금 한주게 가든 예주시에다 개화 주야 돼. 님의 다와 무주시 어직 아직 삼질 님이 직진이 바 숙주무제 아직 무주제잖아. 직 야 다와가 시기네 맞아 샤샤베는 대대한테 수주 맞춰고. 지나는 그디 강은 제바디 무주제기디나 직 제베나 디 무주제여도 야디 누버친 보라지 누버 디고로 가서는 그디 나제여도 거기 야고 차고로 와. 개화들 그디나 레디가서 차고로 왔다는 자 도착으로 왔다.
The second key component, the first was to actually engage fully with one's mind. The second key component is to engage in these practices continuously or regularly. Because you've heard this many times in terms of accumulating virtue. This is something we need to do extensively, we need to do repeatedly, not sporadically. So too with purification. Because they work in the same way, in that one is trying to develop new wholesome habitual tendencies and break unwholesome habitual tendencies. To bring this about requires continuous effort. If one, for example, engages in retreat and one feels some benefit arising, but then the retreat is done and one goes on with one's life and does nothing else for months, whilst one will then have imprints on one's mind will not change. One will remain as before. So therefore, of these two key components, the one is to actively, sincerely engage in generating their consciousnesses that are the four opponent powers, and secondly, to do so regularly on a daily basis.
야, 다든마 대삼 코나 용규네 되네 남들 미규르데 디더르 되네 용신도 디와신다 rabtu kies.
Then the 22nd verse, merely experiencing that alone will not bring complete escape, for whilst it is being experienced, additional negativities will be strongly produced.
자, 너나 가르스 모르는 데야. 자, 당한 저기 대신가도 가르스 제스는 님부터 쉬고 디바디 안에 샤고르 마샤와이나다 베지 나설게는 뭐지 야 야네 야도 나설게 지시우기 탈말에서 지시르와 송르와다. 그래서 다 삼마 가르고 왔으네. 다지 디바사 샤바디 나설마 제베네 디비디보디 용차 디비디보 민차네 되네. 야장 된들 얘기를 와서 송르 얘기를 와서 되고 대삼 코나 용규네스 제사다 되니게 제사데 대삼 코네 용규네스 되냐마 디보 강사샤바디 많은 안소를 깨지 디보디 대보디 파 용차네 아니 대보디 용네 동아 용차와나 안디 제라 다 가지게선 야 된들 끼로 와서 어느 삼는 되는지 방아절 삼는 코시기로 와서 되는 용구로 와서 다디 돈달라
here Shantideva is challenging a doubt one may have, a get out clause that one thinks one may have found, which is that, well, I've created non-virtue, but I know when an imprint is ripened, it is exhausted, and then it's gone. So if I fall to the lower realms, yes, it'll be horrendous, but it will end. When that imprint that has sent me to the lower realms is exhausted, it will end, and therefore I will once again gain rebirth in the higher realms. So here what is being challenged is the mistaken assumption that when one falls to the lower realms, when that propelling imprint is exhausted, one will gain rebirth in the higher realms thereafter.
Desam kone nyongyo na. Denegi dustimne de cheza dipa saje dipa di wango ngasong le kyawale ngasong ge tendele dunga nyo chane de ya ge tendul kiarwa sene kirwa lamna ade tikale khabures dene number migur namtar migur des denegi ngasong le kine denegi tarche ya nga kasore tendul kiese de kale khabures dene namtar migur des kowe dunga ngasong dunga le tarche dele tarche ya and intended to get to it, said the get to Mare, Migurdes, Gig Mares, Galacaushures.
Look at the first two lines. Merely experiencing that alone, so that's what's just been covered, will not bring complete escape. So in other words, it is not going to happen that once that imprint is exhausted, then one's rebirth in the lower realms is done, and rebirth in the high realms will be followed. That is not going to come about.
That element, even in the Gumzeshio, that is a matter of Gumzakarlamna, Dideradini, Noshindu, Divashandara to Kies, Chesan, Dideradini, Kamate, Targamaris, Gumjan Gare Lamna, Dideradini, Noshindos, and Anson Lakin, and Anson Tindilia, Dungan, Yonshin, Bicabria, and Kawasai, Bekalahures, Kawasavana, Joyces, Matasatu Mares. 세상 개와서야 될 깔래 하고 싶으리에서 올라 디다디 녀신도 아니 디바사야 되네 빼 빠도 매 봐서도 그래서 세상다 디바사야 되네 디바 빠도 매 봐서도 그래 세상 되네 디바샹다 예마기 디바사시베 데부 녀와이네 디바샹다 사바기 사신 나수기 땡들이야 디바 사바사시 사바 빠도 매 봐랍도 세디 빠도 매 봐서고래 디사베 기기 디바디기 데부디야 나서 기와래 그래서
So the first two lines makes a statement to dispel that doubt or to challenge that doubt. Merely experiencing that alone will not bring complete escape. Now in the third and fourth line, reasons are presented. For whilst it is being experienced, additional negativities will be strongly produced. This is because when one falls to the lower realms and is suffering intensely, whilst one is suffering intensely, it's incredibly difficult to accumulate virtue. And whatever virtue one may be able to accumulate will be weak. But non-virtue is easy to accumulate whilst experiencing intense suffering. So therefore, whilst one is being tormented in the lower realms, one is creating predominantly causes for further rebirth in the lower realms.
Nazuki, that call to one member, the Diva Sava in a ding also like answer Diva the Yonche, and Diva Sas on the Diva the Yon, the Diva means and I get generally key to Greg, Netic, Diva Mashana Gaya Marsebi, some Dagio Madisam that no 2 years, says a decay to the Kalek Washindu and the Kalek Howard, Imbi, Gare Lamna, also a Telia, Dunga, part of Mevanyodu, and Telia, and Dipa, and just Sava Mongo Sagiris. Kewan Savaside Pecumbure, Kalekawashures. She's a deeper Mongo Savaside, Kewan Yamai Dipa Sazi, David means Savine. Said that in the Dipa Sava Mongo side, the David Yadu, David Duanongoro, and some Kewa watches the two watching Cora that been the Tarakaposhure, so it's the nigger some Matawache, the some Dagioma, Chesa Dinesa, those in the Tarakapo make himself some tane, that didn't under the Danju million was a top channel. Dinigi Yamlinchi, Kohop Yubit Cup Delia, Nangan the Bezu, JJ, same Bame, Madame Bame, or the Madame, same Bayu, the Tipon Gerupcha, the Kitchimushuris, that during Yamle Yapoche Tumna, Capsaris, 단 되게 고급라 배야 고디 고바도 취재 마다와 진행을 제고를 해서 너는 이거 무슨 거야.
So the meaning of the 22nd verse in brief is that do not deceive yourself. Do not believe that just when the non-virtuous propelling karmic imprint that sends us to the lower realms, when that is exhausted, that you will be immediately reborn in the higher realms because that imprint is now exhausted. Whilst it's true, that imprint will be exhausted. Whilst in the lower realms, you will accumulate extensive further non-virtue. And not only that, but there will still be a mass of non-virtuous imprints on your continuum from previous lives. Therefore, the likelihood of being reborn from the lower realms quickly is almost non-existent. So now, whilst one has the opportunity to radically transform the trajectory of your future lives, embrace this opportunity, rely on conscientiousness, and transform your way of thinking.
And another decision is some data which can stand over as some nudging and then can see over as the Geshe champion answer some data level or whether those who some down over as and some down over as that's a simple ya KGG them to quarter sawana deeper diggy Jing Yavala getting also to about me by Yungu Yobena that Jinning around the go about me by the set up Toma me by the deeper such be deeper bottom of a such or just until deeper the Diva the Mashaba in the Mashaba Shashabana, then the digging us on the party or the gear Gures, Jeza, Niaja, and Dentally give Marangas on Tibum on Kigres, said those Kigores. Then is a and then this year. Then there's that the dividing Jimmy Shaku to send some diet. And Dimas all some diet, just an answer like give in there. Narsabi dividing Jibu Taji, Yang, Dentally Kit to Guruas, and detail that go to show or somebody that Yankale how she would is. Those in the Carson, now so I tell the give in that go out to Yanakale Habore. She's not there, go out deeper bottom of a sour, deeper bottom of a cycle. She's not the deeper deep working us on the kid. She's not an answer the ring. And the name is that the Denigi deeper Savanza, the answer give that deeper chick deeper those in the Gumse some time degree table, Naso give you about deeper the Yana Yado. Naso deeper Savasa, the king, also give you about do some done. Do some other answer that Tarkapushi would but some title or that the ring didn't tell ya, go up you Gablia, thinking be and Dibanga such a deeper deeper, Shajin, to Jukunesha. Then it and give out to beans, just not give out to a jeans, be that busy chain and the Dibon to check what he is. She's not same bombing one, that's in bombing on the Madan, the chicken unit, that's also citizen. Digita, setting Tokyo Jubiata, Citizen Janazuna, Kamia, the Denige, Kawakuni, some Matawache, to Shashache, to Smatawache, and Sim and Jigge, so to be by Tienche, Gawa to Yamache or such more
than. Shantideva here is talking to us explicitly, trying to shake us awake, to recognize the opportunity we have, but the peril of not utilizing it well. And he does so firstly by reminding us that even a moment of anger towards a bodhisattva creates causes that will lead to intense suffering for an inconceivable number of lifetimes in the lower realms. So therefore, now refrain from further non-virtue and purify past non-virtue through relying on the four opponent powers. And furthermore, Shantideva is saying to us, and don't deceive yourself saying, oh, it's okay. When that imprint is exhausted, once again, I'll be reborn in the higher realms. That is not going to happen. Rather, one will continue in a downward trajectory, remaining trapped in the lower realms, suffering intensely. So therefore, recognize and embrace this opportunity you have to accumulate virtue and purify non-virtue and rely on conscientiousness so as not to follow the mind of distraction that's so drawn to this life's temporary minor pleasures and this mind that's being so repulsed by this life's minor problems. Lift your view. Lift your view to lives beyond this and strive for what is important.
다니네 어디마 디리 다와니 규네 다게 게고 마제나 딜레 류바 셴메데 딜레 몽방 셴메도 오사시.
Then Shantideva continues on the 23rd verse. Having attained such freedom, if I do not habituate myself to virtue, there is no greater self-deception than this. There is no greater confused ignorance than this.
나도 나라 언저기 단축이 된 뭐지 토바 땐텔이야 개와 곰제 디봉 기룹 개와 약고시 두마도 본다 용시부라고 해서 수고가 되는
So in brief, the meaning is that now that we have this opportunity, if we don't fully embrace it, it's just such a loss.
근데 디리에 다와니 규네 제대 디리에 다와니 규네 다게 기고 맞제나 시도 제산 디리에 시도 당은 저게 나와게다 저 주사비 리딘 개발전 된델이야 안지게 탈바다 템지 캠피고 봉 가래 주네 주기 규스 주네 주투여 봐 얘네 안지게 안지 리딩에 차네 랑근외네 안튀게 되게 차상 상와 先有我呢讲说出来确定个约吧确约吧推荐车上厂里吧去车上的那个推荐车上的这些的大瓦阶段就我就的那个原的开车车上厂这边的那厂里边的电开发这样的的 top 有的是的大瓦你有呢是的这样子 top 有的是我了
Looking at the first line, having attained such freedom. Freedom here refers to the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments we've all achieved. Here we must recognize how truly fortunate we are, how rare and precious this opportunity is. This is not an ordinary life. We have all the required inner and outer conditions, all 18 freedoms and endowments. This is a life to be utilized fully.
자다 텐델이야 저기 개원원도 개와치만 원도 고방 토예치도 디기주에게 녀야 되는데 원도 고방 유튜브에 주 사투고요 두고래 얘네 안에 나 탈비오 고방 토예게 그에 동안 타들 저기 탈비오 고방 토예게 유사나사 개와 주는 주 두고래 선생제 탐지기 되는 산지오 고방 토예치도 아니 가서 냠내지 개와 주는 주 두고래 이내가 두고에 되네 마주바체 아니 다게 개고 맞이나 되네기라 제가 되네기 된 개발전 될 되네 냠는 제네 제 투고 요르 되네기 맞아 받지는 투나야 되네 맞아 받지 개와 다게 개고 맞이나 개와 지금 원조 고방 투비치도 람냠는 맞아 봐 되네 개와 맞주 봐 탈비도 고방 투비치도 아니 가서리 내게 보팅이나 투모가 람이린 바사 책으로 되네기 람로 맞아 봐 되네 심지어 담지 산조 고방 투비치도 한도지 개발 지금 취냠는 맞아 봐이나 얘네 루시네 맞아봐나 되네기 다게 개고 맞이나서 되네기 맞이나서 디소 되네 맞아봐 이나 자데.
Looking at the first 2 lines, having attained such freedom, if I do not habituate myself to virtue. See, here with the term habituate, we see what's been referred to earlier, the need to habituate ourselves to virtuous ways of thinking and break our habituation to non-virtuous ways of thinking through relying on the 4 opponent powers. So independence on the freedom we've attained, the freedom to engage in the Dharma through having all the required inner qualities such as intelligence, as well as the outer conditions such as a spiritual teacher. This is a life we should strive to accumulate the causes that will ensure further excellent rebirths. Moreover, we have an ideal foundation to even develop causes to gain freedom from the sufferings of samsara in its entirety. This is something possible for all of us. And independence on that, we can even develop the causes for full and complete Buddhahood. This is what we should strive to do.
제가 되네게 맞아봐 있는 되네게 제 고업 여바 튕긴 상황 될래야 되네게 맞아봐 있는 안에 가시게 돼서는 딜레 류바시에 대해서 델레 ngazo야 고허 첨부시 우지 티고래 딜레 하베게 고허 태야 말이에서 딜레 류바시는 ngazo 고허 태바 고허 티고 되네 고허 태바래 dile lupa, dine gogo shu, gogo chimbo shu tigwares, dile labi gogo teje yomares, dile lupa shenme des.
But if we don't do that, if we fail to habituate ourselves to virtue, the third line, there is no greater self-deception than this.
지산다 lupa se de gogo tangwa se di rangi rangla gogo tangwa so chego, rangi rangla gogo tangwa, dile dape, karasane dile lupa shenme, dile gogo tangwa chimbo chiyo, dile chawa chiyo, jan yomares, 지산다 nga 저기 digi dhubiyagi, digi zo yakshu da nga zuki nga zu goya di digi re, moya di dunga re, chisna digi di dingi dewa tharbata timshi yubo goba tobiya dang, yani negabgi dewa lada miyu goba tob dindila digi yuwa di digi ruwa da. Chisna di dhubiyagi gyudili ya nga zu gyu madhuba che, sem bame ondo tanga che, dinigi dewa di majiba che, soso rangi gogo tangwa so chego re che, chisna dimpe nga sim bame ondo tanga di gewa dhuma juba di gohar tangwa sob chegore, chisang rangi lupa re, tisha dili lupa lakwa shen kaya mara chidida, nga digi, tarduk digi di, tarwa tamchi gibu gohang digi dili lakwa kaya mewa marwa. Chisang da kowal samdana korwe nili ya digi lada mi digi dili lakwa di korwe digi yo marwa. Chisang di mewa za, di digi dhuwe gyudi nga zo masawa inza, dili nga zo dinigi yusaye gohab yuedi ba jigli ya soso rangi sim bame ondo tangche ntseti samge chawalo dhubche dinige kya madhuba ina chisada soso rangi goha tangware dili goha cheba chido yomare eso.
There is no greater potential self-deception than this. Because when we have come to gain an understanding of why this human rebirth is so precious, we have an understanding of its great value. And we also have an understanding that our underlying motivation for all that we do is the wish for happiness and the wish to be freed of suffering. And having gained some understanding of the Dharma with the understanding of what the actual causes for happiness are and the actual causes for suffering, if we then don't embrace those, accumulate extensive virtue, purify non-virtue, what a waste. There's no one cheating us out of this opportunity but ourselves. If we do not look beyond the happiness and the pleasures and the tribulations of this mere life, if we do not recognize our true potential, such a loss. And no one will be deceiving us or cheating us other than ourselves.
Ini dili mongpa shenpe do, da chisa da mongpa, ma shingpa, mongpa, nesu lianyi ye nami ma shingpa, bende da gewa zhu guwa da diwa pong guwa di, langja da dorja, ma shingpa, mongpa, dili lawa chikaya ma res. Chisa da nganzu goya di digi rwa cha, digi di dewa chodu guwa di da, nganzu gu tarba tamchi gibu gowa di digi di re. That's Korean sometime no Kole Matarba no Korea digidi, Mondio Gomadi, Digi, Devati, Dile Haba, Di body Hamoaje, Di Topja by Yahuimba Hamoa, and then Di Yamsu Leg, Yoag, Good Samatubaina, Samatuba Jeda, Lanya Pangbi, Casa Langbi, and Digi, Lang Machimba. She's not a Panguedi, Azulia, Chick Moe Dungade, she's not Dungade. Manzuki mi tele dunga yore dile thaba dunga chewa de nga some tela entudu tela idata nyewe tela de dunga chile chi dunga chewa de kanga che ya ya chego de jisan dini ge kanga chewa panggo ba de ha mo go de di yo yu diba de pang ma shin ba jisan de dikpa da dikpa pang ma shin ba gewa nyamsu le ma shin ba de ta mlang tur ki ne ma shin ba de mong ba de dile mong ba thaba ji ga yo ma dile mong ba duwa ga yo ma re so de dile mong ba shen me do se.
Like the verse concludes with, there is no greater confused ignorance than this. So this then, we come to recognize that having all this knowledge, that we understand what it is that we need to adopt and what it is we need to abandon, but not applying ourselves to adopting these wholesome ways of thinking and abandoning unwholesome ways of thinking. This is such a state of such confused ignorance. We have this knowledge, but we leave it, it remains merely intellectual. We don't cultivate it within. That we even have an understanding that the actual happiness we long for is lasting, stable happiness that's not punctuated by any suffering. And this is the happiness of liberation and enlightenment. And that is attainable. But not applying ourselves to that, this is deeply sad. And moreover, recognizing that whilst the attainment of such great goals may be a way off, those causes can be accumulated now, as well as the causes for rebirth in the higher realms. Not applying ourselves to that. This is just a state, a reflection of our own confused ignorance, because we have an understanding of the required causes. So at the very least, we need to apply ourselves to close the door to falling to the lower realms and set our goals on something beyond this life. Set the happiness we're striving for to be something beyond this life. The problems we're looking to overcome, not merely those of this life.
원dio 고바 토예치도 아니지 타고 드세비 원dio 고바 돈이지 dimyo 군에 라지 원dio 고바 토예 유 당 님니다 냠는지 개와 줍줍세디 원dio 고바 개와 치마 당하는 줄에 지게 대기 원도 탈바다 탐제 김고 고바 토예 냠는지 띵 개바진 원dio 고바 토고 개와 치마니나야 제델라 양하는 냠는지 제델레 탈바다 탐제 김고 고바 토머리 무디지 냠는지 토예기 띵 개바진 원dio 고바 토고도 선비 니기 군이라제 저게다 진비 냠내제다 추림소야다 소보콤야 전주좀야 소속이 기주르게 되게 개어주게 되듯이 안디 내래 타바 삼다베다 거기 가서 동안 코와 딜레 탈지 탈비 고마 토구 선비 군이라제 디던달라데 진바다야 추림소야 소보콤야 저부야라 소바 개와냠 주야제 니네 디마제다 심전 탐제 라다라와 지버 심전 탐지 고유 동안을 줘지 산유고바 토고도 디엔장의 심전 탐지 단다 달비고 고발은 메꾸기 디엔자당의 심전 탐지 산유고바 토라 지인 셈비게 전주 셈비 군내라지다 진바다야 출문소야 쇠보고며 전주쯤야라 소바다 수수기 개와 강룸나 도시의 개와 강도 두고 그래서 다가지 다등하는 쪽에 된주류된 된들라 되네요 고가 튕긴 차상 차디와 고가 야고요 말이 뒤두고 그래서 디니 지두 마루바이나 디니가 삼다 마루바이나 한테 소소라랑기 지금 체디점이 디기 체디점을 고가 제도 야가라 제도는 소소소소라야 고갑시고 레여바디 고갑 말린 바체 소소소랑기 아니 고가 나와서다 디니가 소소고 고갑시고 레여바디 렘마시 뭐바로 차고래 제가 디니 마인 바체 디니 삽자치는 포지션이 냠는 제고래서 중국어 다시 돌리나
The meaning of this verse then is recognize this incredible opportunity we have each achieved, this opportunity that comes with having attained a hard fought for precious human rebirth, and commit to utilizing it to accumulate virtue and purify non-virtue, accumulate the causes required for higher rebirths, such as, or namely, ethics, generosity, patience, joy, perseverance, and prayer. Strive for that, accumulate virtue, purify hindrances that would otherwise prevent it, and recognize whilst one is training that the sufferings of the lower realms, whilst must be averted, only present part of the sufferings of samsara. Even our own experience now shows us that the higher realms too are abodes of suffering, and generate a yearning to be freed of suffering and do all that's required, to no longer follow the desires for pleasures of this life, and no longer strive just to overcome this life's problems, but look beyond, maybe even look beyond samsara in its entirety, and thereby, in addition, cultivate concentration and wisdom. And as those minds grow within you, coming to see that liberation is possible, then turn your attention to the situation others find themselves in, that they too yearn for happiness, but are suffering. generate love and compassion for them, and develop that further into bodhicitta, and thereby also once again engage in the meditations on generosity, ethics, patience, joy, perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. All of this training is possible for all of us because we have achieved this remarkable human rebirth. So therefore, commit to no longer deceiving oneself, to no longer stealing your future from yourself, but rather commit to striving for these great goals.
And nala dadi kausu dadi shayadi anzu ki lamrim nala sungwa chebe na danjo duen chawa sayad chagurwa chesna da danjo ki dini ki nyamna che kohob yudu kapla danjo danjo duen chawa sumda danjo milipe che chedel ya tarbata tamji kimyo kobang toya chige kiawa chiwa ngondio kobang toya shenliya pepatuya chasa kada chubine dini ki chub tuya ki dien chawa chen chadoyo chesna di dien duen ta chimbu duen de gyachimbo shu chub tuyo bade tuyo baza dien de duen chaware danjo ki lu duen chaware sayaji sungora di naji da danjo duen chawa chesna danjo ki lu toba kap deli ya gyawa dini sayo kohob yoba deli ya gyawa saa kukuri sayad danjo duen chawa de sungudwa kizin kasang nima di shuye de anzo ki mili rinpochi pema sin top kaa kuri sin peda ja shi de danjo nyaka wa sayad limrimna soba da danjo nyaka wa da danjo duen chawa sayad chagore di nama.
In terms of the lamrim, we're continuing as we were last week to look at the presentation that's of this precious human rebirth. So last week we looked at the great difficulty in attaining a precious human rebirth and this illustration of the turtle. Now we looking at the precious human rebirth presentation from the perspective of its great value. That the great value or potential of this rebirth is that we can accumulate the causes that will lead to further excellent rebirths, accumulate the causes that will even lead to liberation and enlightenment, and thereby be of great, meaningful benefit to others. All of this is possible for us. All of this is within our hands because we have this precious human rebirth.
Diva saba ina dibi tebu ngason la ki yungure sesa ngason ki ne dunga pa me yungure asana diva sha je nimbo topshi tenje gyawa saba ina sesa da ngason ki mare sesa da ngason la magyana dentul ki re sesa dushin tarpa tamji ki ko ba te sa gore se ji she de dang du she samdai de sesa da ngason ki di dang dunga da kanga din shyo bare sesa di yu di da garle ki ni chesune diva saba la tin yungu do asebe da ji she de 다디 디 금체데 삼다는 아주야 상예 줌내디기 딘시 초걸 송발라 삼다면 제가 상예 가서 동아 셰바자 가서 동아 방와자 아니 군주 셰바자 그래서 동아세 된가서 동아다 하고 그래서 동아 하고는 동아 유리 하고 그래서 제가 군주 녀모 받은 안 디바 녀모 받는 거래서 디선데 두치나 삼다데 디네 삼다베나 델리아 안 야지 델리아 자야요 바제 제가 동아세 가서는 동아디 삼다디 가르 유티바사 발네 기고레세도 군주 셰바 군주의 샤바차오 자기도와 제자다 델라 님보도 주거네 방구그레세도 제자다 님보도 주거네 남공바차 세도 가서래 고봉문디치 세 남공바치 세치고로 제자 님보도 주거네 가바 안지 나솔레 타야지 탑디 가래라나 제자 탈고래 탈나 안에 가르치고서 이 탈야가 된다라야 아니 디바샤고래 님보도 주거네 샤고래 세 누시네 바직 누 되니게 삼당이 토네 먼저 대시 유도하디에 삼당님 잡든 삼당 유리 바쳐고래.
The result of non-virtue is rebirth in the lower realms with intense suffering. So if we apply ourselves to purification, we will not be born in the lower realms, but will be reborn again in the higher realms. So this comes about independence on causes. Independence on wholesome causes, desired results come. Dependence on unwholesome causes, suffering follows. And the great liberating power of understanding dependence arising is that we come to recognize that our desired result is attainable. It depends, that our desired result depends on accumulating the required causes and abandoning contrary causes. This understanding of dependent arising gives us confidence that we can change the trajectory of our lives. And here too, I encourage you to engage in reflection on the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha taught that suffering needs to be known. We need to come to recognize suffering in our lives, not just the obvious cause levels, but the subtler ones, so that we have a deep desire to gain freedom. And then we will seek out, what are the causes? Why is it that I keep suffering? And those causes then need to be abandoned. Buddha also taught that true cessations need to be attained, and that is done through cultivating true paths. So therefore, in the process of accumulation and purification, include meditation on the Four Noble Truths.
And imagine that delay some chick Gachevar Tamine, Delia, Chesa Delia Karsungusine, Chesa Nansungu, Dunga Diki Panoya Diki Korch, Yudan Yin Tune to go, Chesan you develop Sabbath and Della Tine Yungores. Chesa Dangan Dendra Java, don't do go Tarba Tamji, you Gawa Sabbath, Della Tine, and you took to go. Chesa that Yuda. 제보 윤적이 땡땡이 남자 삼다. 제사다 나서게 유디게 유 디발에 땡땡 거 제사 땡땡 중얼이에서. 너네 개와 탈바다 개왕도 개와 지명원도 고마 토야다. 탈바 탐지기고 고마 토야야 돼. 개와 남냠네 개와 두바 될라 땡땡 걸 봐도 개와디 마두바는 용거 말해서 땡땡 거스. 제사 누우신 땡땡 중고 봐 되네게 삼다이도 제사다 나송기 둥아세디기 유단 찐라 마도바 라운의 주되게 동아지어만 미도아스 삼다다 탈바도 템지 김be 고마세의 유단 찐 현실의 되네 주고의 강라의 마도바 라운의 주되게 탈바 템지 김be 야 미도아스 삼다도스 삼다데 현지 땡지 제외 주에 삼다데 다지게 되네게 삼다네 강한 유단 찐 강라의 마도바 라운의 주비게다 야와세다 동아세 자오기 미도아스 삼다데 현지 땡지 제와 주에 삼다네 야 동바이 삼다가 리오로바 도신다데 제가 디니기 직송요 되갑라 담이 지게 냠네 야고유 캔다 지순데 디니 김제 망고 디니 직송 디니기 어디로 와서 김제 망고 지 된투고다 나가지고 다 장도 셰메디 니 김제 춘주지 아직마도 하고 두고 말봐 제가 디니시네 제가 데데데야 아니 지게 도송에 데라 데네 윤지게 된데 임바 윤지게 되네 뭐 되네 된신 전지를 되는 주바자 현강来嘛对吧让我主的没吧那되네자는 개와디 미개와디 가서 동안에 디바인 바 개와 가서 대와디게 유 개와인 바 되네시네 이제 den신내로 나신 치야다 den신 저와 중에 삼다야다 나 동반이 삼미다도 윤지게 된되게 삼다야 아니 지게 어두신 den신내로 삼다야 디나지 게디 랑도르에 삼다 찾아다 디네 삼다도 망고 휴지다 전시선바다 디네 미소 냠는 나도 디지 망고 김제 망고 삼다 김제 초 강에 망고의 삼다도 디네 삼로 디네 니고 휴지야 돼야 안 지게 개발 마선 개체사도 해준 거로
I encourage you to take these verses we've looked at tonight, as well as what we continue to look at, and approach them in the way that I'm guiding you in our class, but also call to mind the teachings we've had previous to this. Because the way a real practitioner, a bodhisattva, would approach any practice, such as this, for example, is the topic would be, as it is here, precious human rebirth. So that meditate on a precious human rebirth in the way that's advised, seeing it's so difficult to achieve and it's how rare it is and its great value. And then through going through those steps of the meditation, that may be the explicit meditation they're engaging in, but they would call to mind many topics, recognizing that all beings want happiness and to be free of suffering. Happiness is a result that comes about in dependence on virtuous causes. It's a dependent arising. Suffering, too, is a result that comes about in dependence, but on non-virtuous causes. It, too, is a dependent arising. Being dependent arisings, they do not exist in the way that they appear as truly existent, but are empty of existing truly. This means virtuous causes can be accumulated, or to express it differently, virtuous habituations can be cultivated because they are empty of inherent existence. So too, non-virtuous habituations, these can be broken too, because these have just come about in dependence on deep familiarity with a particular way of thinking, and therefore they are empty. Therefore, they can be eradicated. So here we see how a skilled practitioner will be reflecting on the harmony of dependence arising and emptiness, whilst reflecting on a precious human rebirth. The explicit meditation remains precious human rebirth, but I encourage you to bring your other Dharma knowledge into these meditations. Likewise, one can reflect on cause and effect, what the wholesome causes that are required, the unwholesome causes to be avoided. Certainly reflect on the results that follow, the desired results to give you a determination, the undesired results to also give you determination. Reflecting like this, particularly on dependence arising, will lead to the understanding that we are not helpless. We may feel that our mind is uncontrolled, that we keep making the same mistakes, but because these are nothing more than dependent arisings and therefore empty, we can change our habituation. And moreover, of course, in these reflections, one will reflect on the various causes to be cultivated, generosity, ethics, and so forth. One can also use this as a basis to generate bodhicitta. So a skilled practitioner, when meditating on precious human rebirth, whilst that will be the focus of the reflection, will call to mind all the various topics. And in that way, a meditation on precious human rebirth is not something to be dismissed as for beginners, as a simple practice. But a skilled practitioner will relate to such a topic in an extensive as well as a profound manner.
충모라 미림바도 진다 투모라 기침별라 미림바디게 강도도 소소라게 두신 배주해지는 냐면 제고레스 내게 마제바이나 다 내게 안슬야 고갑디 바지고 헐 제태제 경시우라고 그래서 진짜 니네 자디 냐면 제가 예침무시고 그래서 저는 이보다 뒤셔야 되네요.
So in brief, remind yourself of this incredible precious human rebirth you have achieved, and do so in the sense, not just as a mere recognition, but so that a feeling of how truly fortunate I am. I have all the required inner and outer conditions in order to achieve something remarkable with whatever remains of this life. So therefore, I need to purify my mind from harmful habituations through relying on the four opponent powers, and strive in habituating my mind to virtuous ways of thinking, such as ethics, generosity, and so forth. This is the potential that I can achieve in this life. Not to do so would be a great loss. So therefore, I commit to striving to cultivate wholesome minds within. So then thank you. We can conclude there for tonight. If you have some questions, then feel free to ask. Then thank you very much.